Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this discussion on the film Shtetl. I am Dan Bayer. I am a film critic and podcaster with Next Best Picture and Awards Watch websites. Please check us out. But we are here today to talk about Shtetl. We have the writer-director, Ady Walter, and we have producer, Jean-Charles Lévy. Good morning. Thank you both for joining us today. Thank you for talking with us. Thank you, of course, to PJFM for the space, and thank you for letting us show the film as part of the festival. This is a really incredible, very interesting film, and I wanted to start with what was, to me, the most obvious question, which was it always your idea to shoot this film to look like one continuous shot? Was that part of your original conception, or was it something you found later?
Okay, so thank you for having us. It's always a pleasure to discuss, like the movie and especially its origins. So regarding the genesis of the project, yeah, it's been the approach, has been always, it came all together, So when I had the idea just to tell the story of a guy, basically gonna enter for the first and last time a shtetl, with a very simple story, a love story actually. It was always clear to my mind that he would not be able to get out. So I mean, therefore the idea of the single shot, or more precisely the infringing shot, continuous shot, as you said, was very, I mean, it was there, like at the very beginning. So it came all together. There was not a story or a script and then the idea to do it that way. It came all together. And matter of fact, the first thing I've done before even writing, like the beginning of a story or a pitch or a 2-page or whatever, it was just a drawing. So it was under the form of an 8. And I drew that. I was at the time in Berlin and working on a movie basically with Jean-Charles. And I did, basically, I was drawing this, like on a table, on a piece of paper. I asked, like a waiter in a bar in Berlin just to give me a paper, and it just came like that. And I said, okay, I'm going to tell that story.
What I have to say is that day he was drawing that on a napkin, basically, and I asked him, what is it? And he said, it's my idea to do a single shot, black and white, 1941 Yiddish speaking movie about the last 24 hours of a village.
In USSR.
In USSR. And I said to Ady, let's do it.
I mean, I would certainly say, let's do it. I mean,
that was an exciting and challenging proposition.
Exactly. It's exciting, challenging, and it's also, I think, something, or at least, if not the exact story, then the point of view of something that we really haven't seen before. I think it's fascinating because when we talk about this period of time a lot, we talk specifically a lot about the loss of lives. We talk about the 6 million and the individual people that were lost. But something that we don't always talk about is how we also lost, in a very big way, a whole way of life that went with these shtetls. We don't really see that kind of community connection in the same way that we used to back then. So I was wondering how much research did you do into the daily life of these kinds of communities, and how did you incorporate that into your writing of the piece?
I think that, okay, that's the main point actually. The idea was to not to show the deaths, and the destruction, as we unfortunately, in a way, I would say, just like see most of the time. in this type of movies, because this is something I didn't want to show, because I don't think that anyone should show that, you know, like, in a way. It's very, but it's my own, you know, opinion on this, you know, like my own perspective, you know, like, so I was really into showing the life as it were, so how the people were living, you know, because if you want to understand what was lost, as you said, or what is destroyed or what is gone, then you have to take the measure of what has been taken away. And if you want to do this, then you have to show the people in their full scale of life, not in some, you know, okay, that's the beginning of the you know, process of destruction, or because it's already a life out of, you know, misery and death and destruction. So if you really want to show, you know, what was gone, then what was taken away, or what was like killed, then you need to show the people when they've been really alive, and not thinking that, you know, they're going to be taken away. So the idea was to recreate a shtetl in USSR, basically in Ukraine. It was Galicia. I'm sure like lots of viewers here, you know, like know what Galicia was, you know. So it was like part of Poland, you know, mainly that was taken by the Soviet Union in 1939. And to recreate a shtetl there, which was at the time, 1941, prior to the Nazi invasion, not concerned, you know, like by the war itself, because, you know, like they were in USSR. So they were alive. They were dealing with, you know, like Soviet authorities, with many difficult things, like, you know, like the Soviet, you know, administration, like all of that, but they were not about to be destroyed. That's a major difference between, by the way, Nazis and Soviets, you know, like it's, the Soviets were not trying to annihilate, you know, like the Jews. They were trying to basically transform and change everything, and but not especially, but they've been extremely harsh on religious people, or that is not annihilation. So we did with the Ukrainian team, and I want to give a very strong credit to my production designers team, Vanya and Yulia, yeah, very big credit, because they're Ukrainian people, and we've been working with, of course, Jean-Charles, you know, like around that idea for nearly 2 years, to how we're going to recreate a shtetl 1 hour north of Kiev, and we've did a tremendous amount of research, and I think we did succeed. I mean, you tell me, you've seen the movie, so, but this is also thanks to my producer who was here, and who actually achieved the possibility to finance it, I would say.
Yeah, and Jean-Charles, it's a pretty large undertaking to build a whole shtetl. I'm assuming that you didn't go out and find, you know, one that was pre-existing. But so how did you find the space, just the sheer amount of space that you needed to film this, and then how long did it take to actually build this village from the ground up?
So just to give you a little bit of background, I had been basically producing in Ukraine for 5 years before we started this movie. I was introduced to Ukraine by my fellow producer, Olias Barko, and I partnered there with Yuri Artemenko and Vlad Ryashin, who've been very instrumental in helping put together this movie, which are the local producers. So basically, we had a team, a crew of 150 people that we knew and trusted very much. And when this crazy dream started to materialize, we talked to all of them and we asked them to come on board with us in this adventure. And they all did it with a lot of heart, which is so heartbreaking today for us, and a lot of goodwill to help recreate this life. And so we got the authorization to build 25 houses and the synagogue, which is potentially today the largest still standing wooden and hand-painted synagogue, standing and operational. And we did that 45 kilometers north of Kiev, in a prairie, basically, amongst the trees, which was a little bit on the off-road, which actually was a miracle, because still today it's still standing. And despite the fact that the Russians stayed around there for 3 weeks at the beginning of the war, they didn't find it and they didn't use it or destroy it, believe it or not. But so we created this whole village with the help of this crew, which has been amazing. And the way to finance the movie was quite original, because we used about 1/3 from the government, and we were very much supported by the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian State Foundation, and the rest we financed basically through equity. So this is how we put it together.
And how long did that process take of building this? I assume you had a very exact layout for the space, because of
Ady worked a lot with both the production designer Vanya and the DOP Vova, and with our first AD Denis, and basically he worked with them for basically 6 months nonstop, in order to determine how to best put it and pre-visualize the camera shots, in order to be able to do that single shot. But I will let Ady talk about it.
It was just like a very precise work, since it was indeed like a infringing shot. Like the idea was how to recreate a village that we can also like circulate, in it with the with the camera, because of course everything was designed just to let us go through with the camera and the entire crew of actors. It's a very collegial film, as we say in French, so I don't know if you understand that in English. Film collégial, which means like collective, process. Teamwork. Because teamwork, because it's been it's a village life, it's a shtetl. So most of the time we have like, I don't know, like 50, 60 people on screen or in the background, so silhouettes and background actors and small roles, and so we needed the space. So we basically craved, for space. So we had to give the feeling that it was a narrow space, in the same as a shtetl is, but in the same time we needed also to give space to the audience, so to have enough latitude to just basically circulate, within the set. So it's been quite a challenge, and it's been a very interesting challenge as a director, with the cinematographer, the DOP, indeed Vova, Volodymyr Ivanov, and the rest of the team, to give the audience the feeling of being in a shtetl, but also us as a camera team having enough space just to operate, the way we wanted to do. So it was quite the challenge. It's actually interesting to talk about this. There is a lot of sometimes, speculation about if we should have called, that place a Dorf in Yiddish instead of a shtetl, because it's a very small shtetl. But it didn't really matter. I'm telling you that because we're showing the movie in Brussels, and we have tremendous reactions, from the people. Most of the time, it's a very big shock for people, Jews and non-Jews, because I also recall the fact that we did, earn, the audience award in Roma, for this great international film festival, but also we were competing, we were selected, at the BFI, so in London at the British Film Institute Film Festival. So it's not only Jews, it's like Jews and non-Jews, or Jewish and non-Jewish audiences. But in Brussels, we were like in a Jewish festival, and somebody just said, okay, that's not a shtetl, that's a dorf, you should have called that a dorf because it's very tiny. And I said, okay, no one remembers what a dorf is, everybody calls that a shtetl, so in that case, in the case, there's some, there are some people here, listening to that, it was on purpose, we call it a shtetl.
Just to complete that and to enter very accurately, basically it took 6 months to design the shtetl, and it took about 3 months to build it.
Wow, so that's almost a full year.
And 7 weeks to shoot it.
Yes.
and 7 weeks to shoot. How much rehearsal time did you have with the actors for blocking all this camera movement?
Well, I brought my idea was to bring the main cast 2 weeks prior to the shoot. So we agreed with Jean-Charles and the other producers to bring them on set, 2 weeks prior to the shoot. But also we had a lot of like rehearsals before, a little bit in Paris with the main cast, and also on Zoom, of course, with the Yiddish coach, Lily Rosen, who also worked on Unorthodox, like the series. And so she helped us a lot, like doing this. And so, yeah, the idea was to make as Zoom as possible prior to meet all together 2 weeks prior to the shoot. And then we did a lot of rehearsal, and each day, like we were practicing a scene and for half a day and shooting the other half a day. I'm always being very precise about the fact that it's not a real single shot, it's an infringing shot again. So I think I have between 45 and 48 cuts. I'm not sure exactly, but the idea was to, go from a crane, then you take the camera out of the crane and you put it on a buggy, and then you take it out of the buggy and then you put it on a steady camera, and a steady camera runs with the Trinity, and then you take the camera out and you put it on a drone, and the drone flies. That's what I'm interested in, so I'm a very huge fan of Sam Mendes, so this is what we wanted to do, not try to run with one single camera like crazy people, and just like trying to capture something which actually needed a lot of like lights and lights and delicateness,
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks completely seamless when you're watching it. It's an incredible effect.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. The next question I wanted to ask is if you could talk about your decision to use Yiddish as the language for the film. And we sometimes see movies like this that takes place in historical time, and it's not always in the dialect that the people that are depicted would have actually used. And these days, sad as it is, Yiddish is very much an almost dead language. So I was very struck watching it to hear Yiddish being spoken. Was that something that was very important to you in the writing of it, that it reflects the community in that way?
I don't think there's much of a question here in terms of there was no debate, like it was in which language you want to shoot that, like you're not going to make a shtetl, like out of English, so it was obvious to me that it has to be in Yiddish, and we did a very, very thoughtful work on which kind of Yiddish, like we would use for the movie, and try to be as close as possible to the Yiddish that was spoken at the time in Galicia, in Ukraine, and Eastern. So the idea was to we almost did an archaeological research or work on the type of Yiddish that was spoken there. It was a very popular Yiddish, because if you look at the situation today, you're going to be confronted to people, they're all going to tell you, they're all going to say, yeah, well, you're wrong saying that Yiddish is a dead or practically dead language, because it is not. And indeed, and in fact, it is not exactly true, since like Yiddish is, of course, widely spoken in very various zones and areas, but in Buenos Aires, in New York, obviously, like, but then you have to ask yourself the question, where is it spoken and by who? And it's only spoken by ultra Orthodox, or like ultra religious people, and it is not the Yiddish as it used to be. So we really try to find back the Yiddish that was spoken by, I don't know, the guy who works in the shop owners, like the people in the streets, like the people, they were not even religious, or they were like even anti-religious, So that was the main point, to find back this Yiddish, which was actually shared by 11 million people. 11 million people. That's not just like Hasidic people living in Williamsburg in New York, like it's not that. It's the Yiddish spoken by communists, by atheists, by women, by people who rejected, sometimes, like traditions and religion, and who had very various type of jobs and beliefs. Not people speaking Yiddish just because they don't want to speak Hebrew or English because they don't want to mingle with the Englishman, as like almost like the, how do you call that, the Amish, like say, like, so that's not the type of Yiddish we wanted. We wanted the real Yiddish. Is it clear what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, and it makes sense. And finding that language, it adds so much to the character of the film, to the feeling that you were really watching a day in the life of this community, and I think that's really important. I was wondering if either of you had any connections in your background, in your families, to any of these sorts of communities around this time.
Actually, not really. I mean, like I do have, in my case, like even my name, Walter, like they were like Yekes, like, so they were Jews from Germany and Alsace, so they were not strictly talking out of the Ashkenazi world the way we hear it today. So we understand it today. So Russia, Ukraine, Poland, they were more, like from Germany but it's funny because, for instance, I had great grandparents who spoke like Deutsch, which is basically the ancestor of Yiddish because it came from that area. So the connection was, of course, indeed close. I also want to say something, I have nothing against like Hasidic communities because, I do attend, like a shul, like every Friday night and every Saturday morning. And I do sometimes hang out with Hasidic people with very, very much joy and pleasure. So, and it's nice sometimes to hear also some very Heimish, Yiddish expressions, like in their daily languages, in their daily, language. It's good that they keep it alive. I just also want to make that clear. It's not a critic, like what I said before. I was, and they also like, to answer your question, also like gave me ties, like to this, because sometimes when you do hang out with Hasidic people who still have Yiddish words, like that they use every day, that's a good connection, and that's a very present connection. I'll let Jean-Charles answer about his own, background.
No, me, I'm a French Sephardi from North Africa, but my father-in-law was a Polish son of a Cossack, and he was speaking Yiddish. And in my family, coming from Tunisia, the great grandparents were from Poland too. So it's, for me, when Ady offered me to do this movie, it was also an important way to pay homage to all these people. And also, I produced a movie 8 years ago, which was the story of a man called Joseph Joko. It was called The Bag Full of Marble, which is the story of him and his brother on a big journey throughout France. And Joseph used to love to speak to both Ady and me in Yiddish. And this was also an homage to him.
That's really beautiful. I think watching the film, we have Mendel as a filmmaker coming back to his hometown to get his romantic interest, and bring them back. And along the way, there is the divide in the community, basically between the Hasidim and the very, the religious views and practices are paramount, and we need to put those first. And then you have the more pragmatic people who are saying, well, we need to live, we need to make money, we need to put food in our tables, etc. And if we have to bend these religious rules, so be it. It makes that feel very real, for this time period. And then you realize that this is sort of been like the great question for Jews throughout histories, to assimilate or not to assimilate, and where do you draw that line? I'm wondering how you think that this story and this question, how do you think we're still living with and dealing with that today?
It's a good question. I just want to mention the fact that even regarding your question, even like Hasidim and basically people who were not Hasidim, if you need to divide like this into groups, because you also had religious people that were not Hasidim. So, but if you look at a movie where, of course, in Galicia, the Hasidic movement was very strong, they were not that divided, because it's not as it is today. Today, you have like Hasidim, they live completely sometimes out of like even I would say like plain normal Jewish communities. They're just outside of everything which is not Hasidic, is not their world, so. But at the time, like if you look at the movie, they were living in shtetl together. They were living in the same village. They had ties with very different people. So you could be a Hasidic guy and have a brother, for instance, you could have a brother who could be, I don't know, a communist, for instance, and the difference is like you would live in the very same area, in the very same village, so you would talk to these people every day. It was not separated as it is today in in the modern world where so it's a very crucial difference with today. So they would speak to each other all the time, they would debate all the time, because the possibility of debate was there, and also like the people were not, for instance, Hasidim, they were very close to it, because if they were not themselves, Hasidim, maybe a father was, maybe a grandfather was, so the Hasidut was very infusing, the entire, shtetl's life. So even when you were, for instance, a communist or a socialist or a capitalist, or somebody wants to, for instance, immigrate to the United States or to France or to the UK, to do or to have a completely different life, they were close, very close in a way to the Hasidic world, because they were all together. So there was not such a thing as a division. It was more an opposition, but not a division or separation, which is really crucial to understand.
Yeah, and we, it's very different. It's very different today in
Very different.
today's world. Yeah, and we're still having these conversations. As it's so, it's such a natural part of, I think, our identity as Jews to constantly debate about these things, right?
But it's what makes it alive.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
Even again, situation was extremely different at the time than today.
Yeah, very much. I think that's about all the time we have. But before we go, I wanted to ask, there's a lot in this film, a lot of important questions it asks about how are we to live as people? How are we to live as Jews? Where do we draw that line between? What, if there's one thing that you would want the audience to take away from this more than anything else, what would that be?
Well, bring your non-Jewish friends, because that's a movie that talks to the universe. If you there is a movie I love, which is of course like a West Side Story, which actually had some sort of influence, on me. It's about what, like Irish and Puerto Ricans, like if I do recall, well, yeah. And you don't need to be an Irish guy or a Puerto Rican guy to enjoy West Side Story. And it's, I just want to say a little story that happened to me. We were showing the movie two nights at the Lincoln Center, like in New York City, and I had a very beautiful moment where a woman came to me and she said, my husband, he really wanted to see the movie because, like his family is Jewish from Ukraine, and he really wanted to see that, and he grew up in Yiddish and all, and she said to me, you know, I was born in Sicily, and we have 2 kids together, and okay, so I said, okay, sure, I will go with you to see the movie, because, you know, like I'm totally into it. But then she came out of the movie, and she said to me, you know, everything you show in the movie could happen in a village in Sicily, you know, like, so of course, not the outcome, but the love story itself, and you replace sometimes the rabbis by the priest, and the communist Jews by like Italian communists, you know, like at the time, and it works, you know what I mean? So, or the rivalry between like you know, the groups you see in West Side Story. So of course it's a very, very Jewish story, you know, like there's no doubt about this, you know, we don't even need to precise this, you know, like it's in a shtetl and it's in Yiddish, so no debate. But at the same time, it talks to the hearts, you know, like of everybody, and you don't need to be Jewish to enjoy it.
And Jean-Charles?
Very well said. No, I have nothing to add except once again our compassion for the Ukrainian crew. That was really super helpful on the movie, and for us it's also an homage to their craftsmanship and their professionalism. But yes, the movie is about diversity, which is very important.
Absolutely, even more so today. Thank you again. Thank you to PJFM. Thank you to Ady, Jean-Charles. Thank you for letting us screen the movie. And
I just
yeah,
want to say
thank
that
you.
just a couple of screenings, I think, coming up. I mean, there's a lot of festivals now in the States, you know, like I think we have more than like 30 festivals coming up, but I think there are some screenings coming up in New York City, I think on March 28th, and others, but I don't exactly know when, coming up, you know, like in the following weeks. So check it out.
All right, stay tuned. Thanks, Dan, and thanks, PJFM.
Thank you, guys.